It's funny how one moment can redefine your entire life. The day I became the most despised man in the Grandview Lakes community was also the day I found my purpose again. $300. That's what Penelope Winston and her HOA fined me for simply casting a line with my grieving son. What they didn't know was that I had 4 million reasons to fight back, and enough spite to use every single one of them. If you're watching this from your phone in the bathroom, trying to escape your own mind-numbing HOA meetings, drop a comment right now telling me where you're hiding. I promise this story will keep you glued to your screen. My name is Marcus Reed, and until 6 months ago, I was living what most people would call the American dream. I spent 15 years grinding it out in venture capital, eventually cashing out my stakes in a few tech startups for enough money to retire at 42. But life has a way of reminding you that money isn't everything. My wife, Sarah, lost her battle with cancer last year, leaving me to raise our 13-year-old son, Leo. The grief nearly swallowed us whole. The only thing that seemed to help, the only activity that still felt like us, was fishing. It was the last thing the three of us had done together before her health took its final turn. So when I decided we needed a fresh start, I specifically looked for a home near water, somewhere peaceful, somewhere we could heal. The Grandview Lakes community seemed perfect on paper. Upscale homes, good schools, and a beautiful 7-acre lake right in the center of the development. The realtor mentioned there was a homeowners association, but she assured me it was just the standard stuff. Lawn maintenance, paint colors, the usual. I should have paid closer attention when she hesitated before adding, "The HOA president, Penelope Winston, is very dedicated to maintaining property values." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I dealt with 100 difficult personalities in my career. How bad could one neighborhood bureaucrat be? I found out exactly how bad on a quiet Saturday morning in May. Leo and I had been at the community lake for about an hour, fishing off the small wooden dock. It was the first time I'd seen him genuinely smile in months. He'd just caught his second bluegill and was carefully unhooking it when a sharp voice cut through the peaceful morning. "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you're doing?" The woman approaching us was in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in expensive-looking activewear. Her highlighted blonde hair was styled in what I can only describe as the universal, "I want to speak to the manager" haircut. She carried a tablet and wore an expression that suggested we had just caught a school of fish, and then set them on fire. "Good morning," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly. "Just enjoying some fishing with my son. I'm Marcus Reed. We moved into the Cypress Lane house a few months ago." She ignored my outstretched hand completely, tapping aggressively on her tablet instead. "Mr. Reed, fishing is explicitly prohibited in our community lake. This is a direct violation of HOA regulations. I am Penelope Winston, HOA president." She said the last part as if announcing she was royalty. "I'll have to issue a violation notice." "The fine is $300. I felt Leo freeze beside me. "There must be some mistake," I said calmly. The realtor specifically mentioned fishing as one of the community amenities. It was a selling point for us. Penelope's thin smile didn't reach her eyes. "The regulation was amended last month. All residents were notified via email. Ignorance of the rules doesn't exempt you from following them." She turned her tablet toward me, showing a document with the heading, "Amendment to Recreational Use of Community Lake." The date showed it had been approved just a few weeks earlier. We never received any notification about this. I protested. "I personally oversee all communications." "The email was sent to every household," Penelope replied with absolute certainty. "Perhaps you should check your spam folder, though I can't be responsible for residents who don't bother to read official communications." My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice level. "May I ask why fishing was suddenly banned? This lake is clearly stocked. I could see several bass swimming near the shallow edges." Penelope glanced dismissively at our fishing gear. "Environmental and safety concerns. The hooks can injure wildlife, and we've had complaints about the smell of bait disturbing residents who are trying to enjoy the lake views from their homes." She looked pointedly at our small tackle box. Not everyone wants to see this sort of activity while they're having their morning coffee on their patios. Something in her tone made me take a closer look at her. The way she surveyed our modest fishing gear, the slight curl of her lip. This wasn't just about rules. We're being very careful, I said. Leo and I always practice catch and release, and we clean up completely when we're done. Her expression hardened. Mr. Reed, perhaps you don't understand how things work here at Grandview Lakes. We maintain a certain standard in this community. This isn't a public fishing hole. The residents who've lived here for years expect a particular atmosphere. She glanced at Leo, then back at me. New residents sometimes struggle to adapt to our community culture. People who are more accustomed to, shall we say, different types of neighborhoods. The implication was crystal clear, and a surge of hot anger rose in my chest. I was about to respond when I heard a small sniffle beside me. Leo had tears welling in his eyes. This was supposed to be our healing place, a spot where, for just a little while, he could forget his mother was gone. And this woman was ruining it with her thinly veiled condescension. We'll pack up, I said quietly, placing my arm around Leo's shoulders. Please email me the details of the fine and the full updated regulations. Penelope's smile returned, victorious. Excellent. I'm glad we understand each other. And do check your email more carefully in the future. Mr. Reed, we wouldn't want any further misunderstandings. She turned and walked away, her designer sneakers barely making a sound on the manicured grass. Dad, why was that lady so mean? Leo asked, wiping his eyes as we gathered our gear. We weren't hurting anything. I didn't have a good answer for him, at least not one that was appropriate to share with a 13-year-old. Some people just like rules more than they like people, buddy, I said finally. Let's go home and have some lunch. Later that day, after checking every folder in my email and finding no notification about the ban, I started researching our HOA more thoroughly. What I discovered was illuminating. Penelope Winston had been HOA president for 8 consecutive years. Her day job? The owner of a small but exclusive real estate company, specializing in luxury community properties. I also found several social media posts from Penelope herself, hosting lavish waterfront parties at the very same lake where she had just fined me for fishing. These events, often featuring alcohol and loud music, were apparently exempt from her concerns about community atmosphere. Most revealing was a clause buried deep in the HOA documentation. The lake wasn't actually owned by the HOA. It was listed as a common property amenity, belonging to all residents. But the HOA only leased the recreational rights for a 30-year term from the original developers, Meridian Properties, LLC. I felt a jolt of recognition. I knew about Meridian. They'd been quietly struggling since the last recession. And then, I saw the date. The lease expired in less than 2 months. So they want to play the rules game, I murmured to myself, looking out my window toward the lake that evening. Fine, but first I need to find out who actually owns this piece of water. The following morning, I ran into an older gentleman walking his golden retriever past my house. He introduced himself as Arthur Davies, a retired corporate attorney who lived 3 doors down. When I mentioned my encounter with Penelope, his friendly expression immediately darkened. Ah, you've met our neighborhood dictator, he said with a grimace. Let me guess, she quoted some obscure regulation and issued a fine. When I nodded, Arthur shook his head. Penelope's been running this place like her personal fiefdom for years. Most people just pay the fines and keep their heads down. He glanced around and lowered his voice. If you're interested in some background information, why don't you come by for a coffee sometime? I've got quite a collection of HOA horror stories. I took him up on his offer that same afternoon. Over a surprisingly good espresso, Arthur shared what he knew about our community's power structure. He introduced me to another ally, David Collins, a retired local bank owner and one of the few residents who openly opposed Penelope's leadership. David was an elegant man who had experienced Penelope's subtle discrimination firsthand. He had a meticulously maintained database tracking HOA activities over the past decade, and the data was undeniable. Homeowners of color received violation notices at nearly 3 times the rate of their white neighbors. New residents were cited for infractions that long-standing homeowners routinely got away with. And most tellingly, properties that eventually sold at below-market rates due to compliance issues frequently ended up in the hands of shell companies with connections to Penelope's real estate business. Her endgame is the lake, Arthur concluded. Meridian is in financial freefall. They've overextended themselves on a commercial development that fell through, and the lake property is one of their few remaining unencumbered assets. She's been in private talks with them to purchase it herself, not for the community, for her own development company. She plans to reduce lake access and build additional luxury homes on the shoreline. This explained the sudden fishing ban. It wasn't about environmental concerns at all. It was about gradually restricting lake usage to prepare for a complete change in ownership. My professional interest was piqued. As a former venture capitalist, I was well versed in recognizing distressed assets and spotting an opportunity. Over the next few days, David connected me with his former banking colleagues, who provided discreet insights into Meridian's precarious position. Their credit lines were maxed out, and they were quietly selling off land holdings to avoid bankruptcy. The lake property, valued at roughly $300,000, was their most liquid asset. Meanwhile, Arthur was quietly arranging small gatherings with other disgruntled residents. We met in rotating locations, and the stories shared a disturbing pattern. She had cited one man for excessive holiday decorations the day after he spoke against her at a meeting. A foster mother was told her kids were too loud at the community pool, while Penelope's own grandchildren used it as a party spot. Another resident, a young widow, received 5 violation notices after Penelope personally led an inspection of her backyard, then suggested the community wasn't the right fit for her. Each story revealed Penelope's tactical approach: isolate potential opposition, apply selective pressure through HOA mechanisms, and either force compliance or drive people out. Those who fought back faced escalating harassment. Through these meetings, we identified a small but growing coalition. We established a secure messaging group to share information without fear of retaliation. We were building what amounted to an underground resistance within our own neighborhood. I also began researching Penelope's personal financial situation. Despite her carefully cultivated image of success, her real estate company was highly leveraged. She had taken out multiple lines of credit against her existing properties, likely to fund her lavish lifestyle and her attempts to acquire new properties. She's not just doing this for profit, I explained to Arthur and David during one of our strategy sessions. She's doing it out of necessity. Based on these financial records, she's overextended. The lake development isn't just an opportunity for her, it's financial survival. This information changed our calculus. We weren't just facing a neighborhood tyrant. We were dealing with someone fighting for their economic life. That made her more dangerous, but also more vulnerable. The final straw came when Leo returned from school in tears. "The kids are saying we're troublemakers," he sobbed. Brianna said her mom told her we're trying to bring down property values and that we don't belong here. Brianna's mother, I discovered, was one of Penelope's closest allies on the HOA board. The battle had now extended to targeting my child. That night I nearly gave in and considered selling the house, but Arthur's voice came back to me. "That's exactly what she wants. Don't give her that satisfaction." He was right. Walking away would be letting her win, and worse, it would be teaching Leo the wrong lesson about standing up to bullies. I decided it was time to move. Not to a new house, but to the next phase of our plan. I called my contact at Meridian Properties. "I can offer $350,000, I said. "All cash." "Closing in 7 days." My contact's eyebrows shot up. Penelope had offered $300,000, paid over an 18-month period with a complicated financing structure. They needed cash now. My offer was too good to refuse. To maintain secrecy, the purchasing entity was listed as Grandview Holdings, LLC, a shell company I created specifically for the transaction. Unless Penelope personally investigated the corporate registration, she wouldn't immediately connect it to me. What made the transaction particularly sweet was the timing. The day after I closed the deal, Penelope had scheduled a special HOA meeting to announce her grand vision for the future of our lake. She had even hired an architect to create renderings of the proposed improvements, which I'd seen previewed on the community bulletin board. They included reducing the lake's water area by about 20% to make room for a members-only lakeside lounge that would have conveniently eliminated the main fishing spots. Penelope was becoming increasingly aggressive, holding an emergency HOA meeting to announce a special assessment, $50 a month additional fees from each household, to build a war chest for the purchase. At the meeting, she stood at the podium with a PowerPoint presentation titled, Elevating Grandview Lakes, a Premier Vision. She spent 20 minutes outlining how her strategic reimagining of the lake area would enhance property values and community prestige. What she didn't mention, of course, was that her real estate company would be handling the development and sales of the new lakefront properties she planned to build. Penelope also launched a thinly veiled smear campaign against me, talking about new elements in the community who were financially unstable and trying to undermine property values. When David bravely stood up to defend me, Penelope publicly humiliated him by bringing up a long-resolved tax issue from his past. It was a low blow, and the meeting quickly devolved into chaos. As I watched this public display of intimidation, I felt a strange sense of calm. Penelope had no idea that her grand plans had already been derailed. The turning point came when Penelope decided to make a bold statement. She organized a massive lakeside party for all original homeowners, conspicuously excluding the newer residents, to assert our community's rights to our lake. What she didn't know was that I had already filed the necessary paperwork to terminate the recreational use agreement early, citing multiple violations of the maintenance terms. I decided this was the perfect moment for the big reveal. As Penelope's party reached full swing, with about 60 residents drinking and socializing around the lake, I arrived with Arthur, David, and 2 unexpected guests, my corporate attorney and a local police officer. Walking calmly into the center of the gathering, I picked up the microphone Penelope had been using for announcements. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this beautiful day at the lake. Penelope immediately rushed over, attempting to take the microphone. This is a private community event. You weren't invited. I held onto the microphone firmly. Actually, Penelope, I think there's been some confusion about who should be inviting whom. I nodded to my attorney, who handed me a document. As the legal owner of this lake and all surrounding property within 10 feet of the shoreline, I'm informing you that you are all currently trespassing on private property. The crowd fell silent. Penelope's face flushed deep red. What are you talking about? This is HOA property. No, Penelope. It never was. It belonged to Meridian Properties until 3 days ago, when I purchased it outright. I held up the deed for everyone to see. And effective immediately, I'm terminating the recreational use agreement that was set to expire in 28 days anyway. I've asked Officer Davis here to help ensure an orderly departure from my property. You have 15 minutes to gather your belongings and leave the premises. Penelope's face was a study in shock, like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice water over her. You can't do this. The community has rights. Actually, I can, and I have, I replied calmly. And Officer Davis has a trespassing complaint ready to file if necessary. But I'm sure it won't come to that. After all, Penelope, you've always been such a stickler for following the rules. The party dispersed quickly, with many guests shooting accusing looks at Penelope as they left. About time someone stood up to her, one longtime resident whispered as he passed. This has been a long time coming. Within the week, I had private property signs installed around the lake perimeter and hired security to patrol the area 24/7. I also held a press conference to announce my plans to convert the lake into a natural fish conservation area and educational space for children. The community reaction was mixed, but it quickly became favorable as details of Penelope's planned development leaked out. The revelation that she had been planning to profit personally from community property shifted public opinion dramatically. Penelope was livid. She attempted to sue me for destruction of community value, but her case was dismissed almost immediately. The tide truly turned when another board member, a woman named Carol, finally found the courage to speak up at an HOA meeting. She revealed how Penelope had been manipulating regulations and diverting funds to pet projects that only benefited her friends. Her stand inspired others, and the floodgates opened. As more residents began to question Penelope's leadership, I announced a special program: free fishing passes for all children in the community. There was just one exception. Children of current HOA leadership would not be eligible, until their parents resigned from the board. It was petty perhaps, but effective. Within days, several board members had publicly resigned. The most satisfying moment came late one night, when my security cameras captured Penelope and two other board members trespassing on my property, attempting to contaminate the water to support her false pollution claims. The footage clearly showed her pouring something from a small bottle into the lake. I immediately sent the video to the police. Penelope was charged with criminal trespassing and attempted environmental contamination. As she was being processed, investigators began looking more closely at HOA finances during her tenure. What they found led to additional investigations into misappropriation of funds and unethical practices. 2 weeks later, I invited all community residents, except the current HOA leadership, to a meeting at my home to discuss the future of the lake. I laid out my proposal. I would transfer ownership of the lake to a newly established community trust with 3 conditions: a complete restructuring of the HOA leadership with term limits and transparent voting, a review of all regulations to ensure fair application, and the establishment of an independent ethics committee. Then I revealed my final move, one that even Arthur and David hadn't known about. Many of you may not be aware, I explained to the stunned gathering, but during the past month I've also been quietly purchasing the mortgage notes on several properties in this community, from Lakeside National Bank, including Penelope Winston's home. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. I had no intention of foreclosing on anyone, I assured them. In fact, I was prepared to offer refinancing at below-market rates to every homeowner. But first, I said, we need to fix the broken system that's been dividing this community for years. The vote to replace the HOA leadership was nearly unanimous. Penelope Winston was forced to resign in disgrace, facing not only criminal charges, but also multiple civil lawsuits. She eventually put her house on the market, finding no takers due to her now toxic reputation. The lake was officially renamed Sarah's Lake, in honor of my late wife, and I transferred ownership to the community trust with legally binding conditions, ensuring it would remain accessible to all residents in perpetuity. 3 months after the whole ordeal began, Leo and I hosted a community fishing day at Sarah's Lake. Nearly every family attended, kids laughing and learning to fish together, parents chatting amicably. As Leo and I sat on the dock that evening after everyone had gone home, watching the sunset reflect on the water, he smiled. A real, full smile that reached his eyes. "Mom would be really proud of you, Dad," he said softly, leaning against my shoulder, looking out over the peaceful lake. I thought about how justice sometimes comes not from winning, but from rebuilding what was broken. "I think she'd be proud of both of us, kiddo," I replied. A year later, our community had become a model for HOA reform, with neighboring developments adopting our governance structure and ethics guidelines. Penelope Wellington had moved away after losing most of her assets in the lawsuits. I was even approached about running for mayor, but I declined. Instead, I established a scholarship fund in Sarah's name for children who had lost a parent to cancer. Sometimes, the best way to defeat a bully isn't to become a bigger bully. It's to change the rules of the game entirely. And if you're watching this video while dealing with your own HOA nightmare, remember, never underestimate the power of someone who understands the rules and has the patience to wait for the perfect moment to use them. What do you think? Was my approach justified, or did I take things too far? Let me know in the comments below.